welcome to eonlineverse global event broadcast. Russia-Ukraine war had long-lasting effects on many liberal democratic nations like India, the Middle East, Latin America, and Africa. In this global event broadcast, I shall talk about the history of Russia and Ukraine, the conflict background, the reasons for Russian aggression, the consequences of the invasion, the stand of India and the rest of the world, and who benefits from this war, and my thoughts, if it is the end of the beginning. I am Sham Rao, founder and promoter of eonlineverse, the host of today's global event broadcast. If you like this video, please do not forget to hit the like and subscribe button and follow us on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter to get the latest updates. Amid heated debates about the factors that led Russia to invade Ukraine on February 24, 2022, it helps to distinguish between deep, intermediate, and immediate causes. But while each can matter in its ways, war need not be considered inevitable. The past 3 decades, and especially the years since the 2014 Revolution of Dignity and the ensuing Russian annexation of Crimea and intervention in Donbass, have witnessed a significant consolidation of Ukrainian identity. Putin's historical excursions tend to provoke bewilderment West and his claim that Ukrainians and Russians, as well as Belarusians, are one people. This rejection of Ukrainian identity and the claim that Ukraine's desire to separate itself from Russian influence was the product of external forces seems to be not just Russian talking points, but a claim that Putin himself. It contributed to the Kremlin's confidence that the war could be won easily and quickly, that ordinary Ukrainians would welcome. Before we move forward, let me share the Russia-Ukraine conflict background. Ukraine was a member of the Soviet Union until 1991 when it disintegrated, and Russia has tried to maintain the country in its orbit since then. In 2014, a separatist insurgency started in Ukraine's eastern industrial heartland, Donetsk Basin. Russia further gained a maritime advantage in the region due to its invasion and annexation of Crimea. As a result, both the US and the EU have pledged to safeguard the integrity of Ukraine's borders. Ukraine and Russia have shared cultural and linguistic ties for hundreds of years. Ukraine was the most powerful country in the Soviet Union after Russia. Ukraine has been a hub for commercial industries, factories, and defense manufacturing. Ukraine also provides Russia with access to the Black Sea and crucial connectivity to the Mediterranean Sea. Given the background, let me also throw some light on the reasons for Russian aggression. One is economic factors. Russia, considering the economic significance of Ukraine, sought Ukraine's membership in the Eurasian Economic Community, EAEC, which is a free trade agreement that came into being in 2015. With its huge market and advanced agriculture and industrial output, Ukraine was supposed to play a significant role. But Ukraine refused to join the agreement. Second is the geopolitical and strategic factors. Russia claims that the eastward expansion by the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, which they call enlargement, has threatened Russia's interests and has asked for written security guarantees from NATO. NATO, led by America, has planned to install missile defense systems in Eastern Europe in countries like Poland and the Czech Republic to counter Russia's intercontinental range missiles. Russia has been indulging in military buildup along its border with Ukraine, an aspiring NATO member. Russia has stated that its troop deployment is in response to NATO's steady eastward expansion. Russia argues that its moves are aimed at protecting its security considerations. Given these reasons, Russia has mobilized troops on its border with Ukraine. And Russia seeks assurance from America that Ukraine shall not be inducted into NATO. This has resulted in tensions between Russia and the West, which have been supportive of Ukraine. America has assured Ukraine that it will respond decisively in case of an invasion by Russia. Russia has demanded a ban on further expansion of NATO that includes countries like Ukraine and Georgia that share Russia's borders. Russia asked NATO to pull back its military deployments to the 1990s level and prohibit the deployment of intermediate-range missiles in the bordering areas. Further, Russia asked NATO to curb its military cooperation with Ukraine and other former Soviet republics. Based on Russian demands, the West responded by saying, America has ruled out changing NATO's open-door policy, which means NATO would continue to induct more members. America says it would continue to offer training and weapons to Ukraine. America said to be open to a discussion regarding missile deployment and a mutual reduction in military exercises in Eastern Europe. Germany has also warned Russia that the Nord Stream 2 pipeline would be stopped if Russia were to invade Ukraine. America threatens Russia by imposing new economic sanctions in case of attempts of invasion against Ukraine. Given the response from the West, Russia's President Mr. Putin declared that he has ordered a special military operation to protect people, including Russian citizens who had been subjected to genocide in Ukraine. For this we will strive for the demilitarization and denazification of Ukraine. Russia launched an all-out attack on Ukraine through land, air, and sea. The attacks by Russia are considered the biggest attack by one state against another in Europe since the Second World War. After Russia launched an all-out attack on Ukraine, there were consequences of the invasion of Ukraine. The Americans termed the action of Russia on Ukraine as aggressive and as a result, introduced strong sanctions. Several banks in Russia have been sanctioned along with restrictions on transactions of 13 major state-owned enterprises in Russia. The United Nations Secretary-General at a Security Council meeting asked Russia to stop the attack on Ukraine and to give peace a chance. The United Nations General Assembly condemned Russia's invasion of Ukraine and called upon Russia to unconditionally withdraw its troops. Other than Russia, there were consequences for the rest of the world also. Rise in oil prices surged to over a 7-year high per barrel, the highest since August 14, 2014. An influx of refugees. The UN Refugee Agency said that more than 8 million people have fled Ukraine since Russia's invasion, and the figures are rising exponentially. Food supply. Russia and Ukraine are among the top 5 international exporters of cereals, oilseeds, wheat, sunflowers, and corn. Shortage of semiconductor chips. Ukraine supplies rare gases used in the production of semiconductor fabrication lasers, and Russia exports rare metals like palladium to make semiconductors. Hence the conflict worsened the global chip crisis. Of course, we in India also faced the consequences of the Russian-Ukraine war. An invasion by Russia had put pressure on us to choose between the Western alliance and Russia. Maintaining strong relations with Russia serves our national interests. We have to retain a strong strategic alliance with Russia, and we cannot allow Western strategy aimed at isolating Russia. We also understood the possibility of Kotsa sanctions by the Americans because of the S-400 purchase from Russia. Despite the consequence of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, we took our stand from the day the war began. We always called for a peaceful resolution of the situation through sustained diplomatic efforts for long-term peace and stability in the region and beyond. Immediately after the annexation, we abstained from voting in the UN General Assembly on a resolution that sought to condemn Russia. We voted against a Ukraine-sponsored resolution in the UN General Assembly that sought to condemn alleged human rights violations in Crimea. Our position is rooted in neutrality, and we have adapted to the post-2014 status quo in Ukraine. Our standing had made Western countries unhappy and disappointed. We were in a demanding situation with our growing relationship with the Americans on one hand, with Russia, which is a time-tested friendship and historic ties. Moreover, Russia is our primary source of military hardware and technology and has backed us on security concerns at many events in the UN. We also envisaged that in the upcoming days, we will need considerable support from Russia on the issue of Kashmir that can be introduced in the World Organization by Pakistan receiving full encouragement from China. Now million-dollar question, who benefits from this war? Though the military escalation has been vertical, the underlying economic warfare is horizontal. Russia has increasingly resorted to weaponizing energy, especially gas, against heavily dependent European countries. Food and fertilizers are also being weaponized. It may be reiterated that together Ukraine and Russia account for 27% of the world's global wheat exports. In addition, Russia is also a major exporter of fertilizers including potash, ammonia, and urea. Ukraine, on the other hand, is the largest exporter of sunflower oil and corn. The sociological and demographic impact of the conflict is massive. Over 8 million Ukrainians, women and children have taken shelter in Europe, of which 50% are in Poland. Since the beginning of the conflict, more than a quarter of the 40 million Ukraine population has been forced to move out of the country. The Americans have immense coercive power, and yet many important countries have directly or indirectly leaned towards Russia. In this case, the erstwhile American threat, either you are with us or against us, is not working. In March, in the wake of the invasion, 143 countries out of 193 voted against Russia. In April it came down to 93. In October recently, although 143 countries voted against Russia, the 35 abstentions were notable. The OPEC+, led by Saudi Arabia, has decided to cut its oil production by 2 million barrels, which is bound to drive the prices higher and mitigate the sanctions on Russia. The conflict has injected new life into the American and European arms industry, which had become listless due to the COVID pandemic. Till July 2022, NATO countries had sent arms worth $8 billion to Ukraine. The Americans have declared their intent to further infuse $9 billion arms into Ukraine. Its shares have gone up by 35%. BAE is providing huge quantities of ammunition. Its shares have gone up by 32%. The shares of Lockheed Martin have gone up by 14%. Rheinmetall, which manufactures tanks and artillery, shares have gone up by 25%. The more the market value of a firm rises, the higher it ascends in the overall corporate hierarchy. The graph shows the 20 corporate sectors that have enjoyed the largest increase in company market value, outperforming 153 others, since the Russian invasion began on February 24. At its core, war is about power: who has it, who does not, and who can effectively use it. The war in Ukraine is no exception. But the outcomes over the first months of the war have surprised many observers, challenging some traditional assessments of military and economic power. Most unexpected has been that Russia's military advantages did not allow it to accomplish its initial objectives. Instead, Ukrainian forces have held their own and even pushed the Russian military back in places. At least a part of the explanation lies in some changes in the nature and exercise of power that have emerged. 3 developments have been particularly influential, allowing Ukraine to level the playing field. Together, these changes have allowed Ukraine to far exceed its performance, but they also create new challenges for states seeking to exert influence. A first development has been the extensive influence of non-state groups that can act autonomously on the international stage. One example is the role of multinational corporations, whose influence on the Western response to Russia's invasion is unprecedented. Most multinational corporations have acted primarily on political motives. The decisions of almost 1,000 companies to pull out of Russia have reinforced the West's use of economic power. Non-state groups have also used their power in ways and speeds that were not possible before social media. People on the ground in Ukraine have served as influencers and real-time sources of unfiltered information, and those outside Ukraine have organized relief efforts at a global scale. The second development is the extent to which relationships between states serve as key sources of power that are decisive in shaping conflict outcomes. In today's interdependent world, when 2 states compete, the one with more robust relationships may retain the upper hand, even in the face of capability imbalances. The current conflict in Ukraine offers several examples. For instance, the Americans and NATO allies have relied on their strong political, economic, and military relationships to impose far-reaching sanctions and to mobilize massive military aid. Russia has also exploited relational power from its long-standing ideological and institutional ties to India and countries in Africa, and has benefited from its deepening connection with China. At this point in the conflict, it is unclear whether Ukraine or Russia gains more from relational power, but relationships and interdependence are playing complex direct and indirect roles in shaping state behavior. A final development is that some of the most decisive forms of power in the current conflict have not relied primarily on hard power derived from military capabilities or economic wealth. Nor have they been examples of soft power, which influences norms and ideas. Instead, they have been forms of power that blur this distinction and combine the two. The use of intelligence in the Ukraine war has also blurred the line between hard and soft power. A final example of the blurred line between hard and soft power has been the rise of thousands of so-called hacktivists who are engaging in an online campaign to hack websites and combat disinformation. These groups have been using cyber capabilities to seize data and hold it hostage, to collect and release internal government communications, and to break internet blockades to communicate with its citizens. These activities have both operational goals, to undermine capabilities, and goals of persuasion, to break popular support for the war. Campaigns that blend hard and soft power have imposed meaningful costs, and while they do not involve direct military action, the risks of escalation may be unexpectedly high because they have multiple targets and many audiences at once. When employing such tools, policymakers may need to use incremental approaches to avoid unwanted escalation spirals. Some analysts argue that the world has re-entered a Cold War period, dominated by bipolarity and competition between autocracy and democracy. But the greater diversity of actors exercising power, the more extensive interdependence, and the proliferation of tools that combine hard and soft power suggest otherwise. Instead, the world is moving to an environment that is hyper-competitive but in which power is more diffuse, dynamic, and cross-cutting than was the case during the Cold War. This may lead to increased international instability and conflict, and it certainly creates an array of new challenges for states. But it also creates new opportunities, especially for smaller states pushing back on larger ones and for non-state actors seeking influence. To achieve the upper hand, policymakers will need to account for and coordinate the many non-state actors that can exercise power and simultaneously leverage relationships and capabilities to exert influence. At the end of this global event broadcast, I wonder if is it the end of the beginning. There are growing calls by some foreign leaders for Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy to end the war through peace negotiations. The Western pundits worry that continuing to provide weapons to Ukraine, including more sophisticated weapons, might escalate the war to NATO territory. As one assessment concluded, the United States needs to conduct a policy of calculated restraint toward Ukraine that limits arms sales and avoids escalation. Dialogue between Kyiv and Moscow is important. Pushing for a settlement now would reward President Putin for his military aggression. Ensure either Russian de facto or de jure annexation of Ukrainian territory through naked power, and weaken deterrence against future aggressors, including China. While American allied partners support Ukraine's defense to repel Russia's initial offensive, America has still not declared a clear political and military objective of the war. First, the Russian war effort has long been at its maximum level of brutality. Second, the fears about Putin's likelihood of using nuclear weapons. Many of the world's liberal democracies have imposed economic sanctions on Russia. But China, India, and many nations of the Middle East, Latin America, and Africa have not. However, Putin may believe that by weaponizing Russia's energy supplies, he can break up the alliance this winter and end most sanctions against Russia. American government and the business community have already taken steps to move in this direction. America is now exporting over 60% of its liquefied natural gas, LNG, to Europe, up from 20% a year ago. Putin's last hope is that a lack of energy this winter will cause the alliance to fall apart and stop aiding Ukraine.
If you like this video, please do not forget to press the like button, hit subscribe and notification button, and also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn and Twitter to get the latest updates on our eonlineverse channel.